Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome back to a new episode of Social Confoes. I'm your host, Diego, together with my host, Jean-Luc. Jean-Luc, welcome back to the show. How's it going?
It's going awesome. It's really going awesome. And I'm excited about today's topic because I'm always excited to talk about personal growth. But first, we have our general announcements. So please roll them in.
Yeah, if you're tuning in from wherever you are, don't first forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/confoes. We're also on Instagram @confoes and subscribe to our newsletter at confoes.substack.com. That's confoes.substack.com for your monthly inbox goodies. And with that being said, you already mentioned it, Jean-Luc, personal growth. And before we dive into it, on the topic of personal growth and kind of some new releases, if you're talking about television shows, one of the shows I've watched today, or not today, but in the past weeks, is Avatar: The Last Airbender on Netflix. And
Interesting.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with the cartoon from decades ago. It was like when I was in high school, that was one of my favorite cartoons. And there's a lot of wisdom there by especially an old character called Uncle Iroh. And if you look back at it, and it hasn't been much had much presence yet in the Netflix adaptation, but if we're talking about personal growth, there's a lot of quotes of Uncle Iroh that kind of applies to personal growth. And I
What's your
have
favorite
one.
one? Oh, yeah. What's your favorite one?
There's not a favorite one necessarily, but there's a fun one here, especially if you have a goal. The only thing better than finding something you're looking for is finding something you weren't looking for at a great bargain. So
Hmm.
while chasing something, a big goal
Hmm.
or something, you
Hmm.
realize you can find something else and have a spin-off on that as well.
Interesting. Interesting. And it's actually true to a certain degree. You can always find a way to be against it and say like it doesn't work that way or it's not beneficial. But if you look at it from that side, often, and we'll get into goal setting a little bit as well in this episode. Often the most interesting serendipitous moments are the ones that are completely different than what you wanted to do. And for people to have just an idea what something like this could be is like being interested in somebody we might see as your potential future partner. You go to the event, that person isn't there, and you end up meeting the love of your life, for instance. Right? That's kind
Yeah,
of
that's serendipity
yeah.
at its best.
And so these things, and I must say they can happen quite often. And I want to give a tip to this one. I don't see the book on my bookshelf right now, but one of my favorite books is The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
And it has a similar kind of life lesson in there. Like you can walk past something multiple times in your life, and maybe the first time already be interested, but you're not ready for it, and then come back later when you are ready for it. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, oftentimes you chase something, and it's often after four times, five times, after a few revisits, that you either appreciate it or kind of finally realize that it's been there all along, or you haven't been in that phase of your life yet where it's applicable to you. It's just like growing up, basically. So to each their own. And I I have read The Alchemist. It wasn't one of my favorite books, but I do get where you're coming from. It had a lot of, if I'm not sure mistaken, was The Alchemist the one with the short stories,
No, no,
or
no.
was
That's
that's the
from a river. That's another one.
oh,
So
that's the
from
other one? Yeah, yeah.
yeah, the
Right.
Alchemist is about I think it's about a journey,
A
pilgrimage journey.
journey, and he
Yeah,
goes to Egypt, crossing the river, and
Yeah.
kind of selling to a merchant, and then he realizes something. I do know the story in that context.
I mix up Paulo Coelho books a lot as well because I think he's one of two or three authors that I've gone through multiple books in the collection. Malcolm Gladwell being one, and Paulo Coelho being the other, and for completely different reasons and different styles. But speaking of books, that's actually a question that we didn't necessarily prepare. Um, if you would go back for one book to read again, what book would it be?
To read again,
Yeah.
or
At this moment, what book, if you had to decide, like, hey, there's a book that I would have to read again, what book would it be?
I guess the one that I often say this one is Atomic Habits, but I'm not going to use it as a cop out this time. The other one that comes to mind is actually the book that set me off on basically reading, self development, everything. And I haven't read this in years, and that's The 4 Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. That's kind of the book that kicked off a lot for me.
So have you read Ricardo Semler's book?
No, I've heard you mention it a few times,
Yeah.
but I haven't.
I have to be honest, I haven't read the book myself. I've only seen the interviews, like the extended interviews. Um, but I was wondering if, like, what are kind of the similarities between Semler's philosophy and Tim Ferriss?
Yeah,
They're
I
kind of
think,
different in approach, but still there might be some similarities there as well.
yeah, the thing about the 4 hour work week wasn't necessarily, yeah, the content was great and it had a controversial title, especially in the, I think, 2010s, that period.
Yeah.
I listened to it first through audiobook pieces, got introduced to the podcast, listened to a few episodes, got intrigued by his way of experimenting, his way of questioning guests, and then a few years later, I bought the book myself, and then I went through and read it. And as you said, once you revisit it, you see things, you understand things with more experience, and that gave me new insights. So probably if I reread it again now, with the knowledge I have now and the situation, the context we have in the world today, some things might be interpreted differently.
So before we go into my choice, what would you think is one thing from the book that's still applicable to you till this day?
Uh, Still applicable, like the Pareto principle I got from that book, the 2080 rule.
Okay.
Um,
For those that don't know, could you explain it a little bit, the
yeah,
2080
so
rule?
basically, it's being referenced a lot in a lot of kind of productivity management, and it comes down to it. 80% of the output comes from 20% of the effort. Basically, if you look at from a company perspective, 80% from the revenue might come from 20% of the clients. If you're looking from a
It's a
productivity perspective,
principle that's
yeah.
also used in business studies, for instance. Yeah,
So
interesting.
that's
Yeah.
basically one of the things that first things that comes to mind. But also optimizing and automating a lot, outsourcing a lot. uh, Basically, it comes down to that core principle of, you know, uh, doing less and having more impact, and also being free, having the freedom to do that, and stepping into the unknown. Because I remember a passage from that book where he had an example. He went to, was it Argentina, for a weightlifting competition, if I'm not mistaken. And he hacked his body to outperform. Basically, if you eat to a certain way, then your weight kind of decreases, but your performance is the same. So he had performance of a higher class, but got classified in a lower class. And in that sense, you kind of hack your way through situations. There's a lot of life hacks that you get from that book. So about traveling, about starting businesses, like the either he started a product as well, and nutrition something or vitamins, and how to quick rule is a 1 to 5 ratio, the cost multiplied by 5, and you have a decent margin, but multiplied by 10, and then
Yeah.
if it sells, then you got your bases covered and some more.
I have to rethink my whole business strategy after hearing that one. It's funny when you've been to different parts of Asia. I
I haven't
remember
been to
that.
Asia yet, actually. Asia
No,
is the one
oh,
continent that's like high
yeah,
priority on my
it
list.
was the continent of Australia. So the thing with China, for instance, if you go to a market in China and you pay the initial price that uh, they tell you, you're getting ripped off. If you ask for a 10% discount and you get it straight away, you're getting ripped off. So at a certain point, we
The
figured
art of
out
haggling.
no, and you really have to haggle. And at a certain point, we found out that the optimal strategy was um, divide it by three and walk away the first time.
Mm.
And that was how you got a reasonable price for everything. And we had instances where somebody got something for even a fifth of the price, and they looked angry at that person walking away. Whereas if a tourist, an American tourist, would come in and get it for half the price, they would be walk away proud, and the shop owner would also be laughing like, "Haha, you've overpaid for it." So that's a really, really interesting experience, and I wonder to a certain degree. I like hacks for short term purposes, but I don't always like hacks uh, on the long run.
Yeah,
So that's one thing that I'm careful with. My choice would be Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell.
outliers. Yeah, I
And
have read that one. It's been years, but outliers. If I do recall one thing that I remember from that book, and I gave this example to someone recently, and they were mind blown by it. And I do believe it is from Outliers. So it's your recommendation. So correct me if I'm getting this wrong. I remember Outliers. One of the things that it explains, the stereotype of Asians are good at math. You know that stereotype, right?
yeah,
And one of the explanations in outliers, why they are outliers in general, of course, it's a broad spectrum and it's stereotyping, but because of the language, the numbering system, the linguistics of numbering in a lot of Asian languages makes more sense than Western languages. When we say 1, 2, 3, 4, 13, 21, in Dutch we say 31, like the order of the numbers don't make sense if you take it into your brain. If you think about it in Chinese or Japanese or some other Asian
so
language,
you have
it's
a
structural.
general basic Chinese. Can
Yeah,
you
and I can
yeah,
validate it.
okay,
It is
good.
structural in the way the numbers add up. So it's less, it makes more mathematical and linguistic sense for them because it's embedded in the language. And that's one of the things that kind of I took away from Outliers.
That's a really interesting outtake. Because if I would take 10 outtakes, I wouldn't get that out of it. I think there's several outtakes that I do take from that book. Probably my favorite is the 10,000 hour rule,
Yeah.
even though it's over commercialized to this point, and you have to put in 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. But there are a lot of people recently. I came across a video, and because I had a discussion with somebody about this, and she was like, "Yeah, but like People working for the government, they spend 10,000 hours or something. That doesn't mean they're good at it. It's like, hey, wait, you're thinking about the actual skill that you are doing when you're doing that work. They are practicing a different skill, which they're damn good at. Like, so you could have the same job title, exact the same job title as somebody else, but you spend 10,000 hours on one specific skill or one thing that you do repetitively, and they are doing it on another. That doesn't necessarily mean, I mean, you could argue that the thing you're doing makes more sense or the skill that you're creating is more valuable. But at the end of the day, they will be able to use, if they've done it for 10,000 hours, they're damn good at it. That's something that people don't understand. And of course, you want to use it in a positive way, not in a negative way. Because if you spend 10,000 hours on criticizing, you're a damn good critic. But unless you get paid for it, it doesn't really add value. But still, the idea of 10,000 hours of deliberate practice, it makes total sense. I think my favorite anecdote is from the Beatles performing live on the street for 2 years. If you start adding it up, then you start realizing that they kind of growth hacked 10,000 hours of deliberate practice in 2 years' time. Technically
Yeah.
speaking, it's not exactly that, but and you have to imagine that the example that he was giving is that they would perform like almost a full day. They would get up, they would go on the street, and they would perform, and they would go back to bed. That's how much they perform. And these are arguments when you talk with athletes, when you talk with musicians, with artists in general, um, especially in Suriname, there isn't a culture of doing something for 18 hours straight, but it makes you damn creative. So let's take creating content for social media, for instance. Somebody
And
that creates 10 pieces of content a day for 5 years will know better what works than somebody who does it 3 times a week.
just to bring those 10,000 hours in perspective, just to have some other reference, 10,000 hours equals 416 and some days. So that's more than a year. It's a year and
Yeah, but this would be a year if you would not sleep.
exactly. And you mentioned the Beatles did it in 2 years. So take that time compression.
It's insane. It's basically only
It's
playing
insane.
music.
Yeah.
But let's take a modern take on this. Mr. Beast. You could argue that probably Mr. Beast reached his 10,000 hours for YouTube somewhere between the age of 18 and 20.
Yeah.
Like there's stories of him with his friends waking up, putting on a call, so having like a group call with one another, and remaining in that call until they went back to bed. So that would be at least, I think, probably 18 hours at least of thinking on how the YouTube algorithm works, how everything works. So when you're just doing it 2 hours or 1 hour a day and you're skipping days, yeah, you're not gonna get there as fast. And that's something that you also have to take into account. But then also, if you've done something for 10 hours a week for a month, it's 500 hours. So that would mean that you would have to do it for 20 years to get to that 10,000. And that makes sense because most people don't stick to something for 10 years. They just don't. And I think that's where it starts to become important that you understand that those 10,000 hours, it's a real thing. And it's not like a magical benchmark that when you reach 10,000 that you're there, but it does help. I think you're still muted.
Yeah, sorry about that. I think it's a general estimate. Basically, a lot of aggregated data and ten
Yeah,
thousand
the
nice
data
number.
shows that it makes sense around
Yeah,
10,000 hours. Yeah. And
and
that goes for any specific skill. So
yeah.
what skill would you consider that you'd be over those 10,000 or close to those 10,000 hours?
Phew, I'm not sure. Video games. Uh,
Could you
I'd
make
say
them?
problem
Yeah.
solving, puzzling, and
Puzzling. Yeah. Okay.
I'd have to credit this to video games actually, because I started at a very young age and I put in a lot of hours in games and different types of games. You had the traditional Tetris, the Mario, you had the racing, you had I skipped Zelda, uh, you had Pokemon, you had like Portal. There's a lot of creativity that goes into it and a lot of puzzle solving, finding pieces. And actually, language is something I also that kind of accelerated that
Hmm.
skill of English and history through that medium. So it is not necessarily that I, spend 3 hours a day in Duolingo that I got so good in English, but it was spending like 5 hours in evening and got good in Norse mythology and Greek mythology and English.
Okay. Interesting.
So uh, kind of that attributes a lot to kind of the skills I have today as a basis. And that's going back to the quote I gave of Uncle Iroh in the beginning. It is a bargain at a cheap price, basically, right? So in a way that
Interesting.
makes sense.
Interesting.
Um, but deliberate skill, I'd say post adulthood. Uh, that's a tough one. I won't say maybe I've reached those 10,000 hours yet, but I'd say maybe speaking, public speaking, it's getting there, and the podcast definitely adds to that. My camera just went out. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
I'll fix it in a bit while you do your
So
part.
yeah.
But
So
I'd say
Diego's
that that's one
mentioned
skill.
public speaking, and it's interesting because it goes a long way for the both of us in the sense that I wasn't very confident in public speaking um, in my teenage years. So basically, what I did is I started focusing on public speaking during my college years when I was at university. And for 3 years straight, I basically kind of did every group presentation if we had a group project. So for 3 years straight, whenever we went into a group project, I was like, I'm going to do the presentation. And then after 3 years, I was like, it was kind of selfish. Should I maybe let somebody else present? But through those years, I went through every struggle. So I got good at it. Then at work, I got coached. Then I started doing real public speaking gigs. And I got really invested in it when I started learning about the neuroscience behind public speaking. And now you have to understand that the neuroscience is completely different in a room of people, like, for instance, this podcast. So even if you have like those 10,000 hours in public speaking, you'll be more comfortable in front of a screen or in front of a computer, but you still have to learn new skills to make it kind of interesting. Um, for instance, in public speaking in classrooms, I have to slow down. I speak too quickly. For podcast, I have to learn how to enunciate better. So there are these kind of little things that you become aware of them easier and you accept them easier when you've had more experience. And I think that for me is the main difference. So Diego, the thing that I want to know right now is how much time do you currently spend on personal growth and your goals?
I think the first thing we need to define here is, you know, what do you consider personal growth? Because personal growth can be in different fields. Is it in actual skill for work? Is it in actual
What
way of
just thinking about um, your personal growth counts as well. But when you think of it, you also set goals for yourself of things that you want to achieve in a certain time frame and the time that you take to achieve those goals. And you can define it however you want. I think for me personally, writing the book is still a part of personal growth as well. So I count those hours as well. For me, structuring basically my life is also personal growth.
that's a daily grind.
Yeah,
That's the daily grind.
yeah. I'm not so consistent that I have like I write a diary or do a daily evaluation every day, but I do it at least once a week.
Yeah, speaking of writing a diary and evaluating, coming back to, you know, how do I measure or, how much time do I spend on personal growth? It's hard to put an exact number because everything you do daily is contributing to your growth. But I think
Yeah, but it's
where we
not
do have to
deliberate,
draw a
right?
line is, yeah, I was about to mention that deliberate part. That deliberate part has been for me kind of shifted a bit if I look at it from the past few years. Um, but on the topic of personal growth with its podcast, it started as a personal growth project. You remember that when we started. And it is still something that kind of continuously adds those hours to it, albeit a bit less consistent, but it's still there. If we're talking about it from an education, formal education perspective, I think that's an easy way to measure because there's a time frame for getting a degree, and that's one way to measure. But I do also believe that that's not the only way to measure because that's basically for external validation and external measurement. Because I spent hours and hours on YouTube on finance videos, on economics videos. If you're looking at it from that perspective, I've
How do you draw the line between procrastination and informative consumption?
it's hard. It's here's the thing. It blurs between it goes more the procrastination part when you just binge it. It becomes
I
a more
like it.
deliberate practice when you watch it, pause, have a thought about it, make a note on it, resume, and maybe even watch it again a few days later to review to get that
You
second
you
perspective.
know do you know that this is
And I
the
do that
reason?
sometimes.
Do you know this is the reason why I like Gary Vaynerchuk? I cannot binge Gary Vaynerchuk videos.
Mhm.
Like, there's always something in the video that either sets me off that I want to do something, or he's doing something that I want to try, or he's doing something that I feel I can replicate in my own style. So after watching one video, I don't I don't watch another one. I actually want to execute.
Yeah.
And that's really why I like it. And I haven't watched a single one of his videos for a year, but I do remember like early in my entrepreneurial process that if I was stuck, I would just put a video on. And then by the end of the video, I was good for at least 2 weeks.
So that's like the idea, the push you needed to kind of.
Yeah. So if I was stuck in a situation, I would just watch a video. And here's the premise as well. He also, I think he once said it like, hey, if you're still watching my videos every day, then basically you're just consuming and you're not doing anything with the information I'm giving. And the second thing that he also mentioned is like, hey, you don't only listen to what I say, also watch what I do. As in, you can do what he's doing as well. It might not be on the same level of execution, but you can replicate everything that he does for yourself. And you do have to realize if you have the right infrastructure to do it and if you have the proper resources to do it, because you cannot hire a team of 10 people to basically all become your personal team, branding team. And you don't necessarily work in a company or own a company where you can be the marketing department of your own company. But there are definitely things that you can take out of those experiences.
So I have another Uncle Iroh quote in this context.
Yeah,
While it is always best to believe in oneself, a little help from others can be a great blessing.
yeah.
Like I think that's something that I still kind of am a bit guilty on, taking everything on yourself, but believing you can do everything on your own. And I see this also in other people, other projects. They try to take on everything and kind of alienate the people that could add that 80%, referring back to Tim Ferriss. There's a lot of references in this episode, excuse me, but
No, it's
uh,
good. I wanna share a video because I talk about something a lot. And another person who really helped me on my entrepreneurial journey is Guy Kawasaki. This guy. And when I first started my journey, when I wasn't an entrepreneur, well, I was an entrepreneur yet, but I left my entrepreneurial job. Well, I actually left my business to get a day job. Somebody who mentored me gave me a book by Guy Kawasaki, which was a really, really good. I have to find it because I do want to post something about it. And I was lucky enough in 2018 to have my shortest interview ever with Guy Kawasaki. And I wanna quickly share how the exchange went. So remember, this was at Social Media Marketing World 2018. He just finished his talk. It was in one part of the keynote room, so where the it was the same room as where the keynotes were, but it was a separate track session. And as I walked over to him, because I was allowed to ask a question in the room, I turned around and there were like 50 people standing there. So I was like, this has to be quick. But I also wanted to record a snippet. So this was the exchange that we had. From Art of the Start. Yeah. Our first one. Yeah. Okay. So what advice would you give young entrepreneurs starting in 2018? Do you have like one tip where should they start?
They should build their social media platform and work on a prototype.
Thank you very
That's
much.
the most important
That was
thing.
great. Thank you very much. So it's really short.
yeah.
It's
And
it's,
one,
it's really really short. Go
can,
ahead.
can you can you repeat what he said there? Because the audio compared to our audio
It's
was
gonna
kind of
okay. So basically, I
low.
said, build your social media profile and build a prototype.
A polio type,
A prototype.
a prototype.
Yeah. And this is one thing that always like even my first business, we focused way too much on the presentation of the company and way too little on the prototype.
That's a common fallacy of
Yeah.
that's one of the
Like
most common
you
fallacies.
have a brilliant idea, but your prototype sucks and nobody buys it. And you get upset with people not buying your stuff, but you actually have an inferior product. And that's basically what happens a lot of the times. So like I had an interview with Pat Flynn. That one was like a couple of minutes, I think even more than 3 minutes. And this one was the shortest. I think it was like 8 seconds. But the value in it is so insanely good because it's straight to the point. Like work
And
on your prototype.
so one thing to improve on these types of snippets, one thing we would do differently today, and I already see you and
Separate
your team doing
audio. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
separate
Definitely.
audio, but also add the the caption, the subtitles on
Oh
video.
yes. Yes.
That
Definitely.
is kind of a must now, especially with the scroll behavior now. You need that popping text because when I scroll, everything's always on mute. So
Yeah.
you don't hear what people are saying, but you can still in video format get the message.
Yeah. So let's continue on with the skill building. What is one skill that you are currently working on?
If you're talking purely skill, it's kind of figuring out this whole AI thing. It's understanding how kind of systems and automation can be improved upon. So that's one thing I'm constantly figuring out and how to improve, our backend system or how I can help improve clients' processes. So that's kind of a core skill I'm working on a daily, I'd say.
What's your take on it as we've now moved a little bit further in the phases of AI?
So okay, I guess it's good to bring up the most recent controversy on open AI. I think was it in February or January? I think it's in February. They did an announcement on the Sora prototype, the video AI prototype, and like stock photos, uh, stock videos, kind of who needs a photographer or a drone pilot to get that stock footage of the beach on a hill and etc. And there was a lot of buzz around that. So the videographers thought they were safe, but no, the AI is coming for them too. But you need to realize that this is only one small subset of AI. This is generative AI, like creating content. uh, First, it was with text, but this is with imagery, and it requires tremendous computational power. So that's one subset. The other part is, as a consumer, hey, maybe creatives are having their doomsday panic, but AI is not something new. It's been here since the 80s, the 90s. Everything computer has been a stepping stone to computer electronically built, has been a stepping stone to creating
From a
a.
generative from a generative AI perspective, have you come across AI generated copy that felt authentic to
I won't be able to tell you because I doubt everything now.
you?
And if you, okay, if you spend enough times with ChatGPT, with Midjourney, with these AI tools, with Google, how racist this has been recently, you can notice trends in how the behavior is, how certain images are generated, how text is written, and they're talking about a way to implant a kind of a a image print on it that it will visually still look the same, but if you bring it to a scanner, you'd see that it's kind of generated. That's something in the works, I think. But yeah, if you spend enough time, you might notice some patterns The average person won't because they
So
haven't been
here's
exposed to it. But
so
to
that's my
finish this thought,
question. Yeah.
yeah, to finish this thought, I won't be able to tell you if I've come across something authentic because in the right hands, the right person, and the right usage, you would be able to generate something that feels and looks authentic.
So let me
So
rephrase the question. Have you given somebody a compliment on something content related where the person replied, "Oh yeah, it's AI."
no, I don't compliment people online. I don't compliment them unless I know them personally.
IRL, man. IRL.
Yeah, I don't compliment them unless I know them personally
Okay.
and know what goes behind it. Or I might compliment them if I know like that's a damn good use of AI prompting. Like how did you
Okay.
get it to get
Okay.
that precisely with that framing, that lighting in
And
that generated
have you
image?
had that situation?
No, I haven't found someone who could.
Could prompt in such a way that you were properly impressed by your prompting skills? That
Yeah,
was basically my question, Diego.
no, not someone I know. There's probably
Yeah.
things online that, but
Yeah.
then I don't know, right? You don't know what
Yeah.
you don't know.
Okay. Good.
But turning it back to you, before we close up, what's one skill you're currently working on, or also how's the book going along?
I'm currently working on a skill that I haven't spent much time on, and that is really content creation. And people are like, wait, but you create a lot of content. But I haven't really been active on creating content properly, basically at least from 2019 until 2022, maybe even 2023. And still
I
with, yeah,
Yeah, I remember the 2018, 2019. That's where you were pushing
yeah.
and
So I
actually
had
making the content.
in 2014, I had a major content creation year, similar in 2018. And then I think it started with COVID really changed a lot, but also the birth of my son changed a lot in the content creation space. And I started slacking off. I think I did some major interesting influencer and creator campaigns in 2019, if I remember correctly. We did some like big campaigns where I even still edited videos. And then it completely died down. And of course, COVID hit. And during COVID, the podcast, like this is content creation as well, but it's only the long form content, not the short form content,
Yeah, the
not
short burst of
Instagram.
creativity and,
Yeah.
really thinking about
Instagram
every
has,
second.
my Instagram has been that for like 3 years at least. So I'm really having to learn again. Not only has the platform changed, but also creating content for it. LinkedIn, even. I've had situations where people are like, hey, I meet people in person and they tell me, like, hey, I actually reached out to you on LinkedIn and you didn't respond. And so I started also with the LinkedIn content to at least go towards 3 times a week. Um, Twitter has completely stalled. Even Hive has completely stalled. So I really have to kind of get myself again to go into that content creation mode. And funnily, the past years, January, February, had been relatively easy going. So it was easy for me to get started with at least creating some content. But this year wasn't the case. We started January blazing and everything started coming together. And so I do think I spend more time on other stuff, mainly strategy. Um, but a skill that I'm really currently working out is creating more content and then specifically not just Facebook.
Well, hopefully, and I do think we are already seeing that on Facebook, but soon the other platforms will get some life breathed breath. What's the correct pronunciation? Blown into it again. So, so
Yeah.
with that being said, any closing remarks? Anything exciting happening that
Now, I wanted to ask
you,
you, there's just one question, and we can be relatively short about it, is what's one thing you thought you would never do 10 years ago that
this
you are,
podcast? This
yeah?
podcast, being in front of a camera and audio and speaking to God knows how many people and listening. And to my surprise, oftentimes when I go to events or networking or anything, the few times I do get out of the house, you often meet these people and like, hey, I know you from somewhere. Hey, I listened to your podcast. Hey, I really like that. And you think you don't even know these people, and from some random section of the room, and they're like, huh, okay.
Yeah.
So I guess this is something I never expected doing 10 years ago. 10 years ago was when I graduated. Oh my God.
Wow. That's a confrontation. Yeah. For me, I just showed you a video of 2018 of social media marketing world. 10 years ago, I went to my first social media marketing world as a participant, 2014. I would have never thought that I would be working for the organization 10 years later, that I would be part of the team, of their team. Yeah.
10,000 hours, my friend. 10,000 hours.
Yeah. To be fair on that skill, no, I don't think I've come close to even 5,000 hours of organizing stuff. But I do have to say that I used to organize a lot in my younger, like my teenage years, and even in my early adulthood years. And I do actually enjoy it more than people think.
Mm.
But um, there's other priorities, and I think that's something that I want to take away. And I have a question for people that tune in to this episodes, to this episode. Like, what is one thing that you're pretty good at, but you don't use currently in your life? And think about it, write it down, and then consider about whether or not you want to bring it back into your life. That's it from my side.
With that being said, don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter at confoes.substack.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com at Confoes, that's CONFOES. And we're also on Instagram at Confoes. Jean-Luc, roll us out.
Thank you for watching. This was Social Confoes. See you back, same place, same time next week. Bye bye. Swai, swai.